There are Formula One world champions whose names have faded with time. And then there was Gilles Villeneuve. He never won a world title. He won only 6 Grands Prix. Yet some of the greatest drivers who ever lived believed he was one of the purest racers Formula One had ever seen. Gilles admired very few people. He believed respect had to be earned at 200 miles an hour, when reputation meant nothing and only courage remained. Before his life ended in the spring of 1982, he revealed the only 5 drivers who had truly earned that respect. One was his closest friend. One betrayed everything he believed racing should be. And the man at number 1 was not his teammate, not his rival, not even someone who drove anything like him. To understand why these 5 names mattered, you first have to understand the man who chose them. Gilles Villeneuve was not a political driver. He did not manage races. He did not calculate points or protect positions. When Gilles Villeneuve got into a racing car, there was one instruction he gave himself: attack. His Ferrari engineer, Mauro Forghieri, once said that Gilles drove every lap like it was the last lap of his life. In 1979, he finished second in the World Championship in a Ferrari that was not the fastest car on the grid. He won 6 Grands Prix through sheer will, through cornering speeds that made other drivers grip their steering wheels tighter, just watching from behind. But before we get to the names, you need to know what happened 3 weeks before his death, because without it, none of this makes sense. San Marino Grand Prix, Imola, April 1982. Villeneuve and his Ferrari teammate Didier Pironi were running 1-2. The team had given them both a clear instruction: hold position. Do not race each other. The result was settled. Pironi ignored it. On the final lap, with Villeneuve believing the racing was done, Pironi overtook him and took the win. Those who were there that day said they had never seen Gilles that angry, that quiet, that wounded. He refused to speak to Pironi. He told journalists he would never forgive what happened. Those were among the last public words he ever said about a fellow driver. 3 weeks later came Zandvoort. The reason Imola matters is simple. Gilles Villeneuve knew exactly what betrayal felt like, which means he also knew exactly what genuine respect felt like. Number 5, Alan Jones, the 1980 world champion, Australian, blunt, unfiltered, a driver who believed a racing car existed for one purpose: to be driven at its absolute limit. At Long Beach in 1979, neither man lifted into turn 1. Jones later admitted he expected Villeneuve to back out. He never did. They traded paint for half the race. 2 drivers going somewhere no one else was willing to follow. Jones once said that racing against Villeneuve was the closest he ever came to racing against someone who thought exactly the way he did. Then he admitted it made him furious, because no matter how hard he pushed, Villeneuve always seemed willing to risk one thing Jones never would. He never named what that thing was. He did not need to. Number 4, Jody Scheckter, the 1979 world champion, Villeneuve's Ferrari teammate. The year Gilles finished second, and Scheckter took the title. Villeneuve was faster than Scheckter for much of that season. Most drivers in that position would carry the quiet bitterness of knowing they were quicker and still finishing second. Gilles carried none of it. After Scheckter clinched the championship at Monza, he stood on the podium and pointed directly at Villeneuve in front of the entire crowd. He told the press afterward that the championship belonged to both of them. He said Gilles had driven a season that deserved a title and that he had simply collected the points. That gesture cost Scheckter nothing. It meant everything to Villeneuve. In 1982, when Pironi took what was not his, it was the memory of Scheckter's moment at Monza that made the betrayal cut so deeply. Number 3, Carlos Reutemann, Argentina's greatest racing driver. A man of extraordinary sensitivity in a sport that punished sensitivity. He and Villeneuve were not close friends. Their personalities were different. Reutemann introspective, Villeneuve electric. But on the racetrack, there existed between them a respect that other drivers noticed and could not fully explain. The 1981 Belgian Grand Prix, Zolder. Rain so heavy the circuit was nearly invisible. Reutemann found lines through standing water that the television cameras could not track. Villeneuve, watching from the pits during a mechanical retirement, is said to have stood at the pit wall in silence for the final 20 laps, not watching the race, but watching Reutemann. He later said that what Carlos did in that race was the most technically complete wet weather driving he had ever seen from another person. Reutemann came within 1 point of the World Championship that year. Gilles Villeneuve believed until the end of his life that he deserved one. Number 2. Jacques Laffite. If Jones represented the physical, and Scheckter represented integrity, and Reutemann represented mastery, Jacques Laffite represented something more personal. Friendship. In a sport where friendship is rare and trust is rarer, Gilles and Jacques were genuinely close. Laffite was one of the very few people in the Formula One paddock who could make Villeneuve laugh, who could sit with him after a difficult race and say nothing useful and have that be exactly what was needed. Laffite drove for Ligier. He was never in machinery that matched Ferrari, but his car control through high-speed corners was something Villeneuve spoke about with real admiration. Not polite admiration, the kind you cannot fake. In 1982, after Imola, when Pironi had shattered something inside him, it was Laffite who was seen with Gilles in the paddock in the days that followed. Just there, present, not trying to fix what could not be fixed. 3 weeks later, Gilles was gone. Laffite never fully spoke about those final days. Some things, he said, are not meant for public consumption. Number 1. Niki Lauda. This is where the story becomes something deeper than a list. Because on the surface, Niki Lauda and Gilles Villeneuve were opposites. Lauda calculated everything. Villeneuve calculated nothing. Lauda managed risk with surgical precision. Villeneuve treated risk as the price of admission. In 1976, at the Nürburgring, Niki Lauda's Ferrari caught fire. He suffered burns across 40% of his body. He received last rites in hospital. And then, 6 weeks later, he returned to racing. Gilles Villeneuve watched that comeback as a young driver still making his way into Formula One, and something in that story permanently altered the way Gilles understood courage. Not reckless courage, not the courage of someone who does not understand danger. The courage of someone who understands it completely and chooses the cockpit anyway. Lauda, for his part, saw in Villeneuve something he openly admitted he could not fully explain. A purity of intent. A driver who was not performing bravery, but simply being it. They were not the same kind of driver. They were not the same kind of man. But they recognized each other the way people who have looked directly at something terrifying and kept going recognize each other across a crowded room. Lauda was his number 1. On May 8, 1982, Gilles Villeneuve climbed into his Ferrari at Zandvoort for a qualifying lap. He never came back. The collision sent his car airborne into the barriers. He was airlifted to hospital and never regained consciousness. He died the following day. He was 32 years old. In the days and weeks that followed, tributes came from across the sport. But Jones, Scheckter, Reutemann, Laffite, and Lauda, their words were different from the rest. Because they were not eulogizing a legend. They were mourning someone who had looked at them in their truest form, on the racetrack, where nothing can be hidden, and decided they were worth respecting. In a sport built on competition and ego and politics that is rarer than any championship, Gilles Villeneuve never won a world title. He finished second once and spent the rest of his career fighting machinery that was rarely equal to his talent. But he left behind something that championship trophies cannot carry. His Ferrari stopped. His standard never did.